I heard two stem cells talking to each other the other day. There was a baby stem cell and a parent stem cell, and the parent stem cell said to the baby, "You can be anything you want when you grow up." Yeah, so we all know stem cells are template cells, and there are two kinds of stem cells. They're the baby kind, embryonic, that really can be anything they want to be when they grow up, and there's the adult kind that have already decided what they want to do, whether they want to be a physical therapist, whether they want to be a person that starts a hospital, like some of these incredible parents in this room. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you about the top 10 things people are talking about stem cells for cerebral palsy at the moment. So first of all, and you would agree with this, I'm sure, which is why you're happy to listen and not be out at that lovely beach, is that people with cerebral palsy and their families want stem cell research, and it's important that we listen. And there are many markers in this field where you guys have been well ahead of the researchers with the best research questions. So this came up as a priority research question when we asked families and people with cerebral palsy what they wanted. This was their second most important question, and that's why at our research institute we've been trying to put a whole program of research together to answer this question for families. The second thing is that scientists have deemed stem cell research for people with cerebral palsy very worthwhile. So back in 2012, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, which is in California, obviously, in San Francisco, they had $3 billion to spend from the Californian people on stem cells. And we went to see them and we asked them, "Tell us who the best stem cell scientists are in cerebral palsy." And they said, "Actually, we don't know any." And it was a really interesting process. So they actually put a forum together and had 40 of the best scientists in the world look at the case for stem cell research in cerebral palsy, and they unanimously agreed this is a really exciting opportunity for cerebral palsy, and that anything we learned in cerebral palsy research, it was probably also going to benefit people with other neurological conditions, because the brain injury in cerebral palsy is a static injury, unlike something like Parkinson's or MS where the brain is deteriorating. The third thing people are talking about is that stem cell tourism, there are a lot of companies that sell cells to you, and that while we don't have enough research going on, I guess many of you might have even found yourself in this situation. Should I buy stem cells or not? And some of these companies just sort of go unchecked as well. So some of them are great companies, and some of them are really, we've had some clients in Melbourne in Australia who've come back and we've checked which cells they've been given after, and they've just been given salty water. They actually didn't even get any cells. So I work in a place called Australia, another place like Canada, where we have socialised medicine and medicine is free. If stem cells were proven to work, there is a guarantee I'd be knocking on the Prime Minister's door and getting it on the free list. And I promise to do that the day that we have the data. So I can tell you now that nobody is withholding something from you. It's wholly experimental. But let's have a look what's going on. So I like this work by an ethicist in Canada who talked about the problem of all these stem cell sites. It's sort of this science hype, and it kind of normalises that we think there's so much of this going on, it must be proven to work, and it's kind of what these sites imply. And there are a couple of different effects to that. And I think the thing to keep in mind is, and you would know this better than any of the researchers in the room, research is painfully slow. So bone marrow transplant is a proven form of stem cell. It's been proven for nearly 50 years now. But look, it took 20 years from the first transplant, and actually many patients sadly died while this work was going on, for it to move into clinical practice. So it does take a long time to move these things into safe and ethical treatments for you. But a lot of these websites portray a lot of legitimacy, so they use words like therapy and treatment. And one of the things I always think of is, you're thinking about this, is just have a look down the list of the number of the conditions they treat with the same cell. So, if you thought about a cancer drug, you wouldn't expect it to treat every type of cancer, let alone every type of disease. So any company that's with one kind of cells treating every kind of disease is probably a little bit of a flag to you that it's science hype. It's not really true. The second thing is that they kind of tend to do all these sorts of things. So here's an example of a stem cell facelift. Like, I want one, but I got no idea what the heck that is. I don't even understand how that's scientific. And then there's this idea that we get this legitimacy too, because athletes who could afford any doctor in the world seem to be using stem cells and saying they're beneficial. And that's kind of confusing, because it implies that these things are known to work and they're being withheld from us. Here's my favourite: a vegan stem cell transplant. Like, how is that possible? I mean, don't worry, gluten-free's coming, I heard. But it also assumes that they're safe, and that's not necessarily true. There can be physical harms to children. There's a well-documented case of a baby dying in Germany, and the government, with integrity, shut the clinic down, and they just packed up and moved the clinic to another country with different regulations and opened it again. So there's another case, a well-known case of a child that died, and their family kindly consented to a brain autopsy, and she actually had rabbit cells on autopsy, so she wasn't even infused with human cells. So this is an incredibly big risk to take. It's financial risks. I get one email or phone call a week of somebody saying, should I mortgage my house and buy $50,000 worth of stem cells? That's a huge financial burden. I will tell you when they're free. They will be free in Australia when we've proven them to work. This is not, it's not ethically okay to be selling treatments that are wholly experimental. The second thing is, as well, it can be a psychological impact. So there's this Australian study that actually looked at the impact on families, and they felt that they were what they thought of as blocked pioneers. So they were actually, because the government was withholding them from them, they were having to go and pioneer on behalf of all these patients and families. And that's an interesting kind of mode to buy into, and I guess it could give you a lot of energy, but at the same time it's coming from these websites that are giving you lots of information that's not always factual. And this is a family that I know very well, and she's doing some beautiful work trying to fundraise now in Australia, but she spent a lot of money trying to find solutions overseas for her child. So here's some good sites. So the Australian Stem Cell Centre, the Euro Stem Cell Centre, and the Canadian Closer Look at Stem Cells and the Stem Cell Network. All four of those websites actually have some nice key questions. So if you are going down this journey and thinking about stem cells, it's got some open-ended questions, no judgments about things you could ask the provider beforehand. For example, has this been researched? Will you follow me up? So if something goes wrong, will I get follow-up, or is that on me and I've got to sort that out with my insurance? Are the cells human? So some really important questions. So the fourth thing is, I think it's happening in other fields, so we need it to be happening in cerebral palsy. And Lizette Dene's here, and she's done some of the most work in the world fundraising for this with her Let's Cure CP. Isn't she extraordinary? Yeah. And I know there are other parents in this room too who've done a lot of work internationally advocating for this. There are the number of trials overall, so these are the ones registered in the clinical trial site. It's just going up and up, so it means the work is coming. It's slow, but it's coming. And if we look by what specialty, that big blue line, as always, is cancer, but actually the next one is the red line, which is neurologic disability. So neurologic disabilities is the second most common study of stem cells, so the work is coming. Fifthly, most stem cell lines, there are many different kinds under investigation. They're not all the same and they don't do the same things. So these 4 stem cell lines down the side here, so the first one, OECs, olfactory and sheathing cells, so you're making stem cells right while you sit there in your nose, they're there. The next one is neural stem cells. They're the only ones on this list that can make brain cells. They're the ones that make the 3 types of brain cells that connect our brain and spinal cord. And then the third one is umbilical cord blood. So we all had an umbilical cord at some point. Some people saved it. I didn't certainly save mine. But That can be used as a source of stem cells, and it's got a mixed range of type of cells in it. And then MSCs are the last one there, are mesenchymal stem cells, which are derived from bone marrow, and companies can also manufacture those as well. And they're an adult type of stem cell. They're supposed to make more marrow and things like that. So I just put this graph up to show you the different sorts of properties. So olfactory and neural are the only ones that really, if we're going to repair a brain, have the actual biologic case to do that. But it doesn't mean the other ones aren't useful, but they have different properties. So the other two types of cells, they're anti-inflammatory, so they can shut down inflammation that's going on in the brain. And they have this important, the last column, called trophic, so they can improve the environment in the brain. They can trigger it to start its own neuroplasticity process. They might improve the environment of the cell so it can grow new pathways with other mechanisms. But they don't stay in the brain, they only stay there, depending on the cell, 48 hours to a week. They don't engraft at all, they leave the body, but they can trigger the brain to do other things. Sixthly, stem cells are already better than rehabilitation alone, so we've got to keep this research going. So what on earth do I mean by that? Well, we did a search as well, a little bit like the same method you just heard about, so I won't get into it. And there are 5 clinical trials published, and I'll show you the ones underway, trying these different types of stem cells, and they all compared them with stem cells plus rehab to rehab alone. And then we have this graph here, and so don't worry too much about it, but imagine that vertical line in the middle. It's like the trunk on a tree. So if the study falls on the green side, it means it favours stem cells. If it falls on the red side, it favours rehab. And so you can see most of the studies, and that big diamond there is the average of all the studies. It's a geeky statistical technique thing we do, but it shows on average, it's not a cure yet, but it is showing a benefit bigger than rehab on its own. So this tells me as a researcher, a person that's deeply concerned about children's ethics, children's safety, and children actually making improvements, and adults as well, is that more research is urgently needed in this field. So we think that the data shows us so far that in clinical trials, not at stem cell tourism clinics, because there aren't data from those, but from clinical trials, that there is a short impact on children with cerebral palsy's movement skills and adults' movement skills that seems better than rehab alone. 7, the risk to benefit ratio seems acceptable. So when we did that study as well, we had a look at how many people had an adverse event. It was 3% in the stem cell groups and 2% in the control groups. So the adverse events were things like a fever, which was correctable in a hospital with a usual procedure. So it seems probably worth going on. 8th, what we've now found out from these important first step studies is that we haven't yet used the right dose or the transplant method for some of these brain cells, but now we know what to do. So these 2 cells, the diagonal opposite ones that tried the brain, they actually firstly put them in the spinal cord, and the thing about these cells is they don't travel very well. I don't know if you've got children that don't travel very well, but these cells don't travel very well. They just move millimetres. So you actually have to place them in the brain. So that's something we know about, and you might have heard in the media some work going on in stroke and in brain injury in California showing that they're getting better results placing them in the brain. And we do know about the dose as well. And so you can see when on this graph, when we put them in the spine, some of the line falls on the red side of the graph, but when we put them into the brain, it all falls on the green side of the graph. So we're starting to learn about how to do this work. 9th, we haven't started early enough probably. So I believe we should be trying these treatments with people of all ages in proper experimental trials. But the tricky thing is the older you get, maybe the smaller the size of the benefit might be in these early studies. So you need hundreds and hundreds of patients, and they're really expensive studies to fundraise for. So we're in this dilemma in the field. We want to do both, but we also think we need to try some of these studies really early in newborns in the first week of life, because we can use less patients, and when we can show a benefit, then we can roll it out to all age groups. 10th, there's a good team, they're ready, and they're ready to work. So we have a network called Accelerate, and it's an Australian, American and Canadian stem cell consortium of people all playing together well in the same sandpit. And what we do is we design studies together, we share our data, and we speed things up. It's a little bit like track cycling. I don't know if you got into that in the Olympics, but I certainly did. So we're all over the world, and we share these plans and the fundraising and the data so that we can move things faster. And we now have, well, there's my timer to tell me I'm finishing, so I'm finishing. This map with the different, in those vertical graphs there, it's got the different stem cell lines, so we know which studies we want to do next.